Hello there, my name's Andy, Technique Editor for Digital Photo Magazine, and welcome to the latest Photoshop Masterclass video. And in this month's Masterclass, we're going to be discussing the pen tool. Every month in the Photoshop Masterclass, I like to take a tool or a feature in Photoshop and then to create an image with it that will show off or showcase a couple of the different things it can do. And this month we're talking about the pen tool, so I'm going to be talking to you about, firstly, how to use it for making a cutout. Although there are several automated ways of making selections in Photoshop and Elements nowadays, the pros still use the pen tool, and there's a good reason for that. You can get unprecedented control over your outline using this tool. You can create perfect straight lines and curves, and you can follow just about any contour if you practice enough. So there's a reason the pros use it for making selections, and we're going to be going through that today. We're also going to be talking about paths. We're going to create this path that you can see in the cherry blossom petals going around the model. That is all the path created with the pen tool, and then we've applied a brush to it to make it look like these petals are floating around her or spiraling around her. They go behind her here, then in front of her here, then behind her head and in front of her arm and off into the sky. So we're going to be talking about those two things that the pen tool can do. Firstly, let's get started by closing down this window, and I'll just demonstrate for you briefly exactly how the pen tool works. So I'm going to click on this icon, which is the pen tool, or you can hit P on your keyboards, and with black as my foreground color, I'm going to click once on the page. You'll see a little black square has appeared, and if I move my cursor around, you'll see that my cursor is connected to that black square by a line. So the black square is called an anchor point, and that anchors my line. And the line that I'm dragging around it is called a segment because it makes up one part of a bigger line. If I click once more up here, you'll see another anchor point appear, and now I have created a line segment. So that doesn't move and doesn't change, that is fixed in position. But as I move my cursor around, I can create another segment of line. So I'll click once down here, and I've got segment 2, and I'll click once up here, and I've got a sort of a zigzag appearing, and every time I click, I create a straight segment of line. Now, as you can see at the top of the screen here, my pen tool is set to path, so what I'm creating is a path. And if I want to close this path, I can go all the way back to the beginning. I'll click here at the bottom, and then move across to here, and then all the way back up to here. And when I get to the starting point, you'll see a little circle appear next to my cursor. That means I can close the circle or close the path by clicking once, and that is my path. It's made entirely out of straight lines, so it's very angular. I'm going to hit delete here to delete that path, and then I'm going to change this from path to shape. And let's take a look at the difference. I'll click once to create an anchor point, click again here, and maybe once down here, and then once down here. Look at that, it's started to fill itself in. I'll create one more anchor point here and then go back to the beginning. That little circle has appeared, so I'll click once and I've created a closed shape this time. The fill color is black. So when I created a path, there was no fill color and no stroke color. It was just a path. But now I've turned it to shape. That means I can draw any shape I like. So I can click 3 times to create a triangle, for example. My fill color is set to black, but there's no stroke color at the moment. So what if I were to change the stroke to red? I would have a black triangle with a red outline. And that's the difference between creating a path, which doesn't have a fill color or a stroke color, and a shape, which does. Okay, let's delete these. Okay, so what about if I wanted to create a curved line? We know that clicking once gives us an anchor point, but what happens if I click and drag? That is where the curve comes from. So as I drag out, you can see 2 lines extending from my anchor point, and each has a sort of circle on the end. These are called direction lines, and these can be moved together, as they are at the moment, or independently of one another if you prefer. So let's create a couple more of these. I'll create another one down here and just drag, and I'll create another one here and just drag, and I'll go back to the beginning, and when I see that circle appear, I'll click once to close the path. So what I've got there is one anchor tool without direction lines extended from it, and that is looking kind of sharp and angular. And then I've got several more anchor points around this line, and each of them has direction lines extending from it, which has created a curve. So how can I see them again? Well, the answer is hold down the Control key and click somewhere on that line, and now we can see the anchor points. There's one there, there's one there, there's one there, and there's one there. So let's say I wanted to adjust this curve or edit this curve. I would need to be able to see both of the direction lines extending from this anchor point, but at the moment I can only see that one, and that's because only this segment of line is selected, and this direction line and this direction line define this segment. So if I control click on this anchor point, both of the direction lines have appeared. Now I can edit these. If I hold down the control key and click here and drag around, I change both of them at the same time. So I'm changing the left and right direction lines, and that is changing the nature of the curve. If I hold down the Alt key, I can change just one of these. So I can pull it up to create a steeper curve, or I can pull it down to create a sort of concave section, or I can even drag it all the way back to the anchor point to create an angle. So now I've got a sharp corner there and a bit of a corner there. If I wanted to, I could grab this direction line with the Alt key and drag it all the way in. And now I've got another angular corner. If I want to adjust the direction lines for this anchor point, I do the same. I control click on the anchor point, the direction lines become visible. I Alt click on these direction lines and I can edit either of them independently of the other. So I can bring them both in and make a very, very sharp shape like that. Or I can drag them outwards and create a sort of double curve like that. So those are the basic keys of the pen tool that we're going to be using to create a selection around our model. Let's close this down and get started on the image. I won't save that. So first things first, you're going to want to open up your background plate, and it's this shot called springsky.jpg, and you'll find it in the Start Images folder. Double click on it to open it into Photoshop, or alternatively open Photoshop first, then go to File, Open, navigate to the Start Images folder and double click on springsky.jpg. Go back to File, back to Open, and this time navigate to the Start Images folder and double click on Spring Girl. It should look like this once it's opened up. Now this is the girl that we're going to create a selection around. We're going to cut her out and we're going to put her into this environment. So with this image on screen, let's get started by clicking around here with the pen tool. The first thing I'm going to do is turn off the fill color, because the black fill color will obscure the model and that's going to make her slightly more difficult to select. So let's just turn that to this icon, which is no color. It's like a rectangle with a red line through it. Now I've got no stroke color and no fill color. I can just create a shape around her. Let's start at the top of the head, and so we can see it nice and clearly, let's hit Control and plus to zoom in. And then hold down the space bar. When you see the hand appear, you can drag around to reposition your image in the window. And I'm just going to hit Control and plus to zoom in one more time. And you can see now I'm actually at 200% zoom. Now in these brighter areas, there's very little difference between the hair here and the background here, which means that Photoshop would have a really hard time automatically creating a selection around her. That means we're going to have to do it manually the way the pros do it with the pen tool. So I'm going to create my first anchor point here, and I'm going to drag forward roughly in the direction that the hair is moving. And I'm just going to keep clicking and dragging, and in these intricate areas I'm creating quite a few anchor points. And I'm dragging in the direction that the hair is curving. Follow the hairline and just keep going all the way around like this until you've selected roughly the shape of the hair. You're not going to be able to select every single strand of hair. That's fine. We're going to refine this selection later. But for now, create a rough selection around the edge, and if in doubt, try to keep your line slightly inside the edge. If your line goes outside, you might get a sort of white halo going all the way around her, which you don't want. So try to keep your lines inside if you possibly can. If anything goes wrong, simply hit Ctrl and Z to undo, and then make another anchor point. If that happens and the rest of your line disappears, you've started a new shape, which you don't want. So hit Ctrl and Z again to undo. Click on the last anchor point, which is there. When you see that little circle with the line extending left and right, that means that you are reactivating that path or that shape, and now when I create another anchor point, it will be connected. So continue to drag and click all the way around the outside of the model. and just keep a couple of pixels inside the edge. To speed things up, I'm going to cut to the end of the process now, so I'll see you in a couple of seconds. Okay, now we're coming up to the end of the path, so I'll get back to this point, and when I see that little circle, I'll just click once to close the path. And it looks like a couple of these anchor points have actually strayed outside the line of the hair. So I'm going to control click on this line here, and I'm going to control click on that anchor point. You'll see it turn dark, and I'm just going to control drag that in, and I'll hold down the Alt key, pull this direction line into the anchor point, and then control click on the anchor point and just drag it inside just to make sure it's inside the line of the hair. And now we're done. So what we need to do next is to turn this shape into a selection, and we can do that by right clicking anywhere on the line, and a little menu will appear, and in there you'll see the option make selection. So click that once and a dialog box will appear. Put the feather radius at 0.3 pixels, and that will give you a slightly softer edge. A really hard edge there will look unnatural because cameras naturally soften the things they capture, but a feather radius of 0.3 pixels will keep it just a little bit soft and it'll look a little more natural as a result. We'll leave anti-alias ticked and we'll click OK. Now we have a selection. Now if I drag up and over to the right hand side, you'll see that the selection is a little bit too smooth and it doesn't encompass all the hair like this bit over here. So we'll need to refine this selection. To do that, activate the quick selection tool, which is over here, or it's W on your keyboard. Now the quick selection tool is active, but we need to look at our layers panel. So go to Window and hit Layers. That's great. And make sure that the background layer is selected rather than the shape, because we want Photoshop to refine the edge based on the information that's in the background layer. Now in the tool options bar, you'll see a refine edge button. Hit that once and this dialog box will appear. Make sure the refine radius tool is active and set your brush size to about 17, and then just draw a line all the way around the edge of the hair and try to avoid touching the clothes or the skin. Just try to get the very edge, and Photoshop will intelligently try to make a selection around any stray strands of hair, which will make it look a lot more natural than it would if you tried to cut that out by hand. Release the mouse button and there you have it. Photoshop has created a selection. It's partially transparent, but we'll try and fix those problems in the next step. But that little strand of hair there has been well captured and it's looking a lot better. So we'll output to a new layer with a layer mask, and then we'll click OK. What we've got then is our background layer has the visibility turned off, so we can no longer see the background. In the layer above, we've got the model, and she's been masked so that all of the white areas are showing and the dark areas are not showing. So now all we can see is our model. That's looking a lot better. So all we've got to do to get that into our spring sky image is to activate the Move tool, which is V on your keyboard. Click anywhere inside the image and drag up to the tab of the spring sky image, and then hover your mouse over the image and release the left mouse button, and there she is. Now this is the reason we kept our mask intact. You can see a white line running down the right side here, which means that we've got a little bit of tidying up to do. So let's activate our brush tool, and with a soft black brush, for example soft round, and with black as our foreground color, we're going to click on the mask to select it, make sure it's active, and then we're just going to click once up here, hold down the Shift key, and click once down at the bottom. I'll zoom out. Now I can't see any other bits that we need to correct, so I'm just going to hit Control and T to activate Free Transform, and then hold down the Shift key and drag those corner handles around. You can click anywhere in the image to drag and reposition, and then once again holding down the Shift key, I'm dragging the corner handles to shrink the image and get it into a position that looks about right. I think there looks good. I'm going to hit Enter to accept those changes, and now I can see a white line right there. So with the mask still selected and with the brush tool still active and with black as our foreground color, click once, hold down the Shift key, click again to draw a straight line and remove that little bit of white. Let's go up to the face and zoom in nice and tight and see if there are any transparent areas that we need to fix. Yes, we've got a little bit of transparency over here. That's not too disastrous. I'm going to duplicate this layer 4 times by hitting Ctrl and J 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that's created a less transparent looking outline, so I'm going to select all of those by keeping the top one selected, holding down the Shift key, and then clicking on the bottom one. Now all 5 of those layers are selected, and now I'm going to hit Ctrl and E to merge them all together. And in doing so, I've deleted the mask. The mask is now gone, and all we've got is a pixel layer with a transparent background. So now what we need to do is to create that path for the cherry blossom petals. To do that, we're going to create a new layer, which you can do by hitting this Create New Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Click that once, and we have our new layer. And now activate the pen tool by clicking on this icon or hitting P on your keyboard. And now let's see this at full size by hitting Ctrl and 0. Okay then, let's get started. I'll create my first anchor point just off the bottom of the screen, out of the frame, down there at the bottom right. And then I'll move my mouse over to the left-hand side and click and drag upwards around here somewhere. Now that's not bad, but the line, the segment, is disappearing out of the bottom of the frame. So I'm going to Control click on that anchor point and just drag it up until it looks like it's in the right place. That looks a bit better. Then I'll go to the opposite side, the right side, and once again click and drag upwards. That's pretty good, but I think I want the path rising a little bit more, so I'll Control click on the anchor point and just drag it upwards. That looks better. Now I want the petals to flow around her hand, past the back of her head and around this hand, so I'll go all the way to the left here, click and drag upwards. That's not too bad, but maybe a little bit higher would be good. So Control click on that anchor point and drag it up. There we go. And my final point on screen, I'll put all the way over the edge here to make it look like the spiral is widening. That's great. And then one final click outside the frame so the path continues to disappear out of the top of the frame there. Now what we need to do is to import our cherry blossom petals. So activate the brush tool by clicking on this brush here. And click on this downward arrow which says click to open brush preset picker, and then click on this gear icon here and you'll see a flyout menu, and then click on load brushes. Navigate to the start images folder, and inside there you'll find cherry blossom brush brackets digital photo. You can click on it once and then click load, or you can double click it and it will be loaded into Photoshop for you. To see it, simply scroll to the bottom in the brush preset picker and you'll see Cherry Blossom Brush Digital Photo. Click it once to highlight it, and then click outside the menu to close that menu. So now we've got our path here, and we've got our Cherry Blossom brush selected. All we need to do is go to Window, and then click on Paths. And that will open up this Paths panel. At the top you'll see Work Path, and at the bottom you'll see a row of icons. And the second one from the left is the one we want. I'm just going to drag this up so you can see the message that appears when I hover over it. Let's hover over the second from the left, and it says Stroke Path with Brush, and that will essentially apply our brush to the path. Now there's already randomization in terms of color, shape and scattering built into the brush. Double click on the black, and in here we'll select a nice bright pink color, something that looks like cherry blossom, and then hit OK. Then once again hit that icon, and now we've got cherry blossom petals along the path. We no longer need the path, so we can hit backspace or delete to get rid of that path. And let's go back to the layers. At the moment they're a little bit too transparent for me. I'd like them to be clearer. So let's duplicate that layer 3 times by hitting Ctrl and J once, twice, 3 times. That looks about perfect to me, so I'm going to select all of those layers by keeping the top one selected, holding down the Shift key, selecting the bottom one, and then hitting Ctrl and E. Now all of my cherry blossom petals are on the same layer. That's perfect. Now I'm going to create a mask by hitting this icon, which is the Add Layer Mask icon, and I'm going to paint out some of the cherry blossom petals to make it look like the path is going behind and in front of her again. Now to make this process a little bit easier, firstly I'm going to need to go to the brush preset picker and to select a hard round brush. I'll click outside to close that menu. Make sure that black is your foreground color, and then Control click on this layer, the model layer, and that will create a selection around the model. So now anything we paint will only appear inside the model, and it won't appear outside on the sky or grass section. So with the mask still selected, paint over the petals you'd like to hide with the black brush. I'm going to hide these ones by her hips so it looks like the path is going behind her. I'll leave this path as it travels in front of her, and as it comes back I'd like it to go behind her head, so I'm going to hide all of those petals that are in front of her face. That's perfect. Then the path goes back in front of her hand, around and off the top of the screen into the sky. That's ideal. So we'll hit Ctrl and D to deselect that selection, get rid of that selection. And now we have a path of cherry blossom petals winding around the girl and disappearing off into the sky. And that is how you can create a selection and make a cutout using the pen tool, and then add a brush to a path using the pen tool to create this spellbinding spring-themed image. Once you've got a file you're happy with, just go up to File, Save As, and save your image as a JPEG with a brand new name so you don't overwrite the original. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this Photoshop Masterclass video. The pen tool is one of the trickiest things in Photoshop to master, so take your time and practice as much as you can with it, and when you get used to the way it creates curves and lines, you'll be creating selections and cutouts like a pro in no time. When you've got an image you like, definitely send it to us at dpimages@bauermedia.co.uk. We always look forward to seeing your work. That's all from me for this Photoshop Masterclass. I'll speak to you again next time. Bye-bye for now.